Picture 22 machines that do not belong in 1944. They are angular, matte black, and impossibly loud. 6 AH-64 Apaches riding the point. 10 Black Hawks spread behind them in a staggered wedge. 6 massive CH-47 Chinooks bringing up the rear. They skim the English Channel at 50 feet, rotor wash cutting white fans off the tops of 6-foot whitecaps. Below, the sea churns in a force 6 gale. Inside every cockpit, the GPS display reads the same thing. No signal. There are no satellites over Normandy in 1944. There never will be for another 40 years. That first question, how do they navigate, has a real and unglamorous answer. Modern military helicopters carry self-contained Doppler radar systems that bounce continuous microwave beams off the sea surface and measure the reflection to compute ground speed and drift with extraordinary accuracy. Paired with ring laser gyroscopes, these systems keep precise position without a single satellite. The crews fly the channel in total electronic silence, invisible to everyone except themselves. German Freya coastal radar stations pick up fast, low-altitude returns and log them as probable RAF mosquitoes. No alert goes out. Rommel is in Germany visiting his wife on what his meteorologists assure him is an impossible invasion day. The rough weather burns 12% more fuel than planned. That is the first small entry in a ledger that will grow very long, very fast. The formation pulls into the shadow of the Normandy coast with H-hour still 90 minutes away. The primary objective is Point du Hoc. 225 Rangers, under Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder, are supposed to scale a 100-foot chalk cliff on rope ladders while German machine guns fire straight down at them, an assault that will leave more than half the battalion dead or wounded by noon. Here, the helicopters change the arithmetic entirely. 2 Apaches hover 2,000 meters offshore and wait. When the garrison's MG-42s light up the cliff top, the thermal cameras catch every muzzle flash like small furnaces. 4 Hellfire missiles go through the forward observation bunkers in under 90 seconds. Concrete turns to rubble. The garrison drops into subterranean tunnels. 44 Hellfires remain. This matters more than anything else said so far. 2 Chinooks slide sideways over the cliff top, and 90 men fast rope onto secure German ground before the defenders can regroup. Here is where the story might have gone wrong. The concrete casemates the Rangers expected to destroy were empty. The 155mm coastal guns that could devastate Utah Beach had been moved 1,000 yards inland to an apple orchard, hidden under camouflage nets. Historical Rangers found them on foot patrol and spiked them. In this scenario, the difference is 12 minutes instead of 3 hours of fighting to reach the same point. An Apache's thermal camera sweeps the orchard tree line, catches the heat signatures of 5 large metal cylinders not behaving like anything agricultural, and radios a grid. Rangers are already moving on foot. The guns are spiked before 6 in the morning. The Point du Hoc objective is solved, but Omaha Beach's machine guns are already firing. The soldier on the Easy Red sector of Omaha in the original history experienced something close to organized massacre. The naval bombardment that was supposed to silence the bluffs had overshot every target in cloud cover, and the bombers had delayed their release to avoid hitting landing craft. Widerstand's Nest 62 was fully intact when the first ramps dropped. Heinrich Severloh and his gun crews had unobstructed fields of fire across 300 yards of open beach. You need to understand what that position actually was. WN-62 was not a single bunker. It was a reinforced concrete network, overlapping embrasures, housing a 75mm anti-tank gun, multiple MG-42 machine guns, and mortar pits connected by underground passages. Naval shells were designed to punch warships. They bounced off these bluffs for an hour and changed nothing. An Apache does not need to be accurate to within a yard. It needs to be accurate to within a foot, and the Hellfire was engineered to enter narrow apertures. The lead pilot rises above the bluff line at 2.5 kilometers standoff, well outside the lethal range of any weapon WN-62 carries. The FLIR gimbal tracks the brightest heat source, the muzzle flash cluster of the 75mm gun. 2 missiles leave the rails with a sharp crack of ignition. One flies straight through the concrete aperture. The second follows 10 meters later. The strong point stops firing in the time it takes to reload a bolt-action rifle. 30 seconds of 30mm cannon fire sweeps the connecting trenches before survivors can regroup. The Colleville Draw, the road exit that historically cost the 1st Division 5 hours of men and ammunition to force open, becomes accessible before the second wave of landing craft arrives. Soldiers who historically died pinned against the shale bank instead get to their feet and move. The Merville Battery on the British flank tells a parallel story with a sharper price. Lieutenant Colonel Terence Otway's 9th Parachute Battalion reached the battery with 150 men instead of 600 because scattered night drops left most of them miles from the objective. The gliders carrying their heavy equipment had smashed into Rommel's anti-glider stakes, wooden poles planted in every clear field to deny this kind of airborne approach. 2 Chinooks hover 10 feet above the battery's interior courtyard. The twin-rotor downwash snaps the wooden poles flat like reeds. 80 British paratroopers come down the rear ramp directly inside the wire, bypassing the minefield, the barbed wire, and the stakes entirely. The FlaK gunners in the perimeter ring know what to do. They open fire point blank. A 20mm FlaK Vierling stitches rounds across the Chinook's fuselage before the escorting Apache suppresses the position. The heavy transport's starboard fuel cell punctures, self-sealing but losing 40 gallons. 2 crew chiefs take fragmentation wounds. The Merville guns are silenced, and Sword Beach's flank is protected. But hovering that close to a defended position was not a decision any modern doctrine would permit. It was a choice forced by the geometry of the objective, and it cost something real. The Medevac Blackhawks are already working the surf line at Easy Red. 4 of them touch down on hard-packed wet sand, while German mortars adjust fire onto the landing area, throwing geysers of wet sand across the cockpit glass. Flight medics load men onto litters, thoracic wounds, shattered legs, heads in field dressings, and the aircraft are climbing back toward England in under 3 minutes. Critically wounded soldiers, who historically bled out on wet sand or drowned in the rising tide, reach a surgical base in under 30 minutes. No precise count matters here. What matters is that each aircraft making that run burns turbine hours, absorbs salt spray through intakes not designed for ocean landings, and returns to Normandy with one less margin of safety than it left with. The coastal bottlenecks that defined the original D-Day tragedy are no longer controlling the invasion's timeline by midday. The cost is fuel, damage accumulating in ways not yet visible, and a finite ammunition supply the morning's work has already bitten into. Modern JP-8 is nearly gone. Somewhere in a Norman field, ground crews are opening the first 1944 jerry cans. Watch what a felt filter looks like after a flight engineer uses it to pass British 100/130 grade leaded aviation gasoline into a Black Hawk's fuel port. The filter is already brown at the first pour. That brownish tint is the beginning of the problem. The engineers know what they are doing and do it anyway. Stopping the aircraft means surrendering the beachhead to whatever the afternoon brings, and German armor is already moving. The choice is not between good options and bad options. It is between continuing the mission on poisoned fuel or watching the afternoon without air cover. Modern gas turbine engines will combust high-octane gasoline. The combustion chemistry is close enough to work. What they cannot tolerate is the tetraethyl lead that 1944 Allied aviation fuel carries at roughly 4.5 grams per gallon, a concentration that made the piston engines of Spitfires and Mustangs perform at extreme altitude, but which turns to glassy lead oxide slag the moment it touches a turbine nozzle, running at temperatures those piston engines never reached. Every flight hour on 1944 fuel deposits more slag on the hot section blades. The temperature gauges begin climbing above normal limits within the first hour. This is not failure. It is the beginning of a countdown. The mineral oil is worse. Modern turbine gearboxes run at bearing temperatures that petroleum mineral oil cannot survive. It thermally cracks into solid carbon grit, clogging the oil passages that keep precision metal surfaces from grinding into each other. Flight engineers know the rough timeline. Somewhere between 2 and 5 hours of cumulative operation at normal power, less if maximum torque is demanded repeatedly. The oil sumps will fill with what looks like black sand. The bearings will seize from the inside. German rifle fire from the 716th Infantry Division's remnants harasses the refueling perimeter, so Apache escorts hold overhead orbits during the ground operation. Orbiting burns fuel at nearly the same rate as transit. Every minute of hovering cover accelerates the degradation clock. General Wolfgang Pickertz III, FlaK Corps is not sitting still. His anti-aircraft gunners watch the morning's engagements carefully. Individual aimed fire at fast-moving rotorcraft is nearly useless. The aircraft are too quick for a gunner tracking by eye and trigger, but terrain is not quick. The bocage of Normandy is a landscape of ancient sunken roads and 10-foot hedgerows that channel low-flying aircraft through predictable corridors. Pickard's crews identify transit routes toward Bayeux and Saint-Lô, pre-sight their 2.0 centimeters FlaK 38 quad mounts into intersecting arcs covering the full width of each corridor, and wait without showing a heat signature. A scouting pair of Black Hawks transits one of those corridors in the early afternoon. 4 FlaK mounts open simultaneously without a single tracer to signal the ambush. Thousands of 20mm high-explosive incendiary shells per minute filling a lane 50 meters wide. The lead aircraft takes hits through the tail rotor gearbox. The pilot has no control surface to arrest the spin. He auto-rotates into a sunken pasture and puts the aircraft down mostly intact. 2 crew members are injured. The airframe is a total loss. 21 aircraft remain. Surviving crews immediately abandon low-altitude valley transit. They climb to altitudes outside light FlaK's effective ceiling, or terrain mask behind coastal ridgelines, using pop-up attack maneuvers that sacrifice smooth approach geometry for survivability. Climbing burns fuel faster and demands more power from turbines already running on 1944 chemistry. The adaptation that saves lives costs endurance. Everything taken from the fuel column gets added to the degradation clock. The 21st Panzer Division's armor is moving toward the gap between Sword and Juno beaches. The surviving pilots know the confrontation is coming. They also know the Hellfire inventory is a shrinking number they cannot replace. The first thing a Panzer IV commander notices is not the helicopter. It is the tank ahead of him, vanishing in a column of fire and black smoke. A thunderbolt sound, and then the tank at the rear vanishes too. The column is boxed. The road behind and ahead are burning. There is nowhere to accelerate and nowhere to retreat. General Edgar Feuchtinger's 21st Panzer Division made the only major German armored thrust that reached toward the coast on D-Day in the original history. 40 to 50 Panzer IVs and Stug III assault guns drove the gap between British and Canadian beach sectors all the way to the high ground above Beeville before Allied air power and anti-tank positions turned them back. That fight was decided at the margins. Different timing or stronger coordination with the 12th SS Panzer might have severed the bridgehead entirely. 4 Apaches are working the Lebesy Ridge using the pop-up technique the bocage ambush forced them to learn. They appear above the tree line, designate lead and trail vehicles simultaneously, and put the last cluster of Hellfires into the column in a compressed volley before pulling back below the ridgeline. The tactic boxes the formation and eliminates room to maneuver. Allied anti-tank screens and ground attack aircraft are contributing to the same fight. The helicopters are not acting alone, but they are forcing decisions the German column cannot handle simultaneously. German tank commanders respond the way professional soldiers do. They fire smoke canisters and set the dry Norman hedgerows burning, flooding the attack corridor with thick black petroleum smoke. The smoke degrades the laser designators. 2 Hellfire shots track erratically in the broken beam and miss. The pilots switch to 30mm cannon runs through lower density gaps in the smoke. The standoff distance that kept them safe collapses to under a kilometer as they dive in, firing the M230 chain gun at the thin top armor of the Panzers, the part most vulnerable to vertical fire and most exposed when a helicopter attacks from altitude. The last precision missile leaves a rail with the Apache's turbine temperature gauge already well above its red line. The choice to make close cannon runs is not made casually. Preserving engine health means pulling back and letting the armored column reach the gap in the Allied line. The beachhead is not yet deep enough to absorb a tank thrust to the water. Ground commanders are holding thin positions with exhausted infantry. The pilots know what the close runs will cost the turbines. They make them anyway. 2 Apaches report compressor stall warnings during the pull-up maneuvers. The surging sensation of a turbine momentarily losing its combustion cycle as lead-fouled blades disrupt airflow. Both recover. One will not restart cleanly on the ground. The 21st Panzer thrust breaks. Tank crews who survive the top armor strikes disperse into orchards and farm lanes, and the momentum of the column is gone. Allied infantry consolidates the high ground. The armored threat that historically came closest to the sea on D-Day does not reach the coast. The lodgment holds. The temperature gauges do not reset. The abnormal readings sit on every instrument panel, moving in only one direction. A mechanic opens the cowling of a Chinook's rear turbine after the aircraft shuts down for the evening inspection. The bearing sump looks wrong. The oil that should be amber brown is flat black, not the dark brown of used oil, but the black of carbon grit, the residue of petroleum mineral oil that cooked into solid sludge inside a bearing chamber, running at temperatures it was never designed to see. He probes the material with a screwdriver. It does not move like liquid. It barely moves at all. Ground crews work through the night flushing oil lines with kerosene, cannibalizing non-essential aircraft to keep essential ones running. The process buys hours, not days. Aircraft that can still generate a restart are grouped into a reduced core group. The others are quietly parked with their rotors tied. Fewer than half can generate a useful sortie by D+1 morning, and those that do may not generate a second. Every landing and restart cycle forces the mineral oil through the bearing heat again. The compressor stalls arrive in irregular sequence across different airframes. A Black Hawk cannot restart because the turbine wheels have seized cold around a slug of coked oil. An Apache's second engine runs rough and is shut down precautionarily. A Chinook's rear gearbox vibration rises above limits during run-up, and the aircraft is grounded before liftoff. Each failure is its own particular chemistry, arriving at its own particular moment. Landing craft are still unloading below on Omaha and Utah. The infantrymen who cross the channel in heaving LCVPs are moving inland across ground where the defenses cracked faster than anyone had planned. German 7th Army staff officers describe Allied flying artillery that appeared before dawn, erased fixed coastal positions in minutes, deployed troops from the sky, and then stopped appearing entirely. There are no replacement parts in Normandy or in England or anywhere in 1944 for the avionics, the composite rotor blades, the turbine blade coatings, or the precision bearings now choking on carbon sludge. Within 48 hours, the operational count reaches 0. Not because of enemy fire, though one airframe was lost to it, but because of chemistry. The tetraethyl lead won. The mineral oil won. The physics of running 21st century engines on mid-century fuels did exactly what the engineering limits said it would. The machines performed at the outer edge of that boundary because the crews pushed them there deliberately, and because the objectives the beachhead needed were worth the cost. 22 helicopters are written off in under 48 hours. The lodgment is secure. Fewer men died at the waterline than in the history we know, though no precise count is possible, and none is needed. The soldiers who walked up the Colleville, draw in the second wave instead of the sixth, will fight the hedgerow country of Normandy the same way everyone fought it, on foot, in the summer heat, one field at a time. The rotor blades sit motionless on a Norman bluff above an active harbor. 100 ships are at anchor below. The campaign that will take 11 months to reach Berlin has just survived its most dangerous morning, and the men who will fight it are already moving inland on their own legs, through ground the helicopters cannot follow. That is the answer. Yes, 22 modern helicopters could break the critical coastal defenses, neutralize the armored counterattack, and pull survivors from the waterline before the tide came in. And no, they could not survive 1944 as an operating system. The fuel that was supposed to power them through the day poisoned them by nightfall. They were extraordinary machines used once as single-use instruments of a single decisive morning, and then the war moved on without them.